Good evening. I would like to call to order the Oregon City Council regular meeting for February 24th of 2025. The time now is 7 o'clock, and please join me standing of the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call of council members that are present?
Mrs. Ackerman? Here. Mr. Drake?
Here.
Mr. Horniak?
Here.
Mrs. Pauloff? Here. Mr. Reeves?
Here.
Mr. Solander?
Here.
Mr. Wallenczak?
Council, Mr. Wallenczak informed me that he was going to be out of town tonight. So if I could seek a motion to excuse him from tonight's meeting, I'd appreciate it.
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. With that taking place, also present at tonight's meeting is our Mayor Michael Safarian, our City Administrator Joe Major, our Clerk of Council Cassie Rawson, our Law Director Melissa Papora, Public Service Director Paul Roman, Police Chief Brandon Began, our Assistant Police Chief Ryan Spangler, Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Finance Director Nick Roman, and Building and Zoning Commissioner Steve Schrake. Our next order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from February 10th, 2025 regular council meeting and the February 17th, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for approval of the minutes of the February 10th regular and the February 17th Committee of the Whole meeting minutes as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Does anyone have any objections? Meeting minutes are accepted as presented. We're going to go a little out of order tonight. We need to add items before we go to persons and delegations. We need to add items 050 of 2025 through 052 of 2025 to tonight's agenda. Can I seek a motion to add these items to the agenda?
Mr. President,
Mrs. Ackerman.
I'd like to make a motion to send item number 52 back to committee for further discussion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call of council, please, for item 52 of 2025.
Mrs. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Solander?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Absolutely.
Mr. Horniak?
No.
Mrs. Pauloff?
No.
Mr. Reeves?
No. At this point, we have it fails, so we will have it on tonight's agenda. If I'd still need to seek a motion for item 50 through 2025 through 052 of 2025 to add to this week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move to add items 50, 51, and 52 of 2025 to this evening's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. We have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Council, are there any objections?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
I got a question for Ms. Purpura. So with it being a 3-3 vote, how does that work as far as?
Mr. President,
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Drake, it takes a quorum, a majority of 4 votes to pass. So being that the motion was made to place it, it would have taken 4 votes to free of charge or not, wasn't really the topic. It was at what height would the city want to, or what council would want to put on for the height at which it was to be cut. 10 inches, some said 8, some said 6. There wasn't, remember, this wasn't a direction that came from the administration. This was a direction that council authorized. Us as administrators up here, myself and Joel Mazer, we have the task of enforcing whatever they pass. So that would just be up to us to see to it whatever they do gets done. And we would do that. So we weren't really in objection to what height they were picking, just make a decision and that's where it lied. It was confused whether, what would be cut. Ditches, the city, unusual things that are, in the right of way, the city cuts. The ditches, weird, swales, weird configurations of how the slopes are in the right of way. The city knows people don't have it and the city does cut that. As for the rest of the right of way, you'll find 97% of the people cut their right of way. 3% or so don't. The 97% gets a little irritated. Say, well, they cut theirs. We cut ours. Everybody ought to cut theirs. And we agree with that. They ought to, but if they didn't, or if they in the retail area even got much over 6 inches, rather than let it irritate the adjoining businesses, the city went in and cut that just to keep peace sort of in the retail area. So that's how this whole conversation got started. And it is maybe a little taken out of context, out of proportion about what would happen, or who should cut what. And until it hit social media with some exaggerated topics, it appeared council was pretty much on board. It was just a matter of, and I see you shaking your head, it was saying you weren't even here.
Couldn't even listen to it.
Yeah. Well,
Ms.
all I'm saying is that just putting things in perspective, we
Mr.
as the
Mayor-
administration, we're going to be content with whatever council decided, and we would just enforce whatever decision they made. It's been talked about since they passed the property maintenance code, which I believe was in summer of last year. And so it's not like the reason council, from my understanding, wanted to get on with it, with the decision, is because it's still before grass cutting time. People would have time to understand what they were going to be required to do and be able to make appropriate decisions on how they were going to have to cut their right of way. And then this weekend, a few put things on social media and got people rattled, which some people do often.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to continue on with our agenda. So we have a motion by Mr. Horniak and a second by Ms. Pauloff to add 50, 51, and 52 to tonight's agenda. They have been added to tonight's agenda. And now I'm going to go out of order here, and I'm going to, we're going to go out, like I said, out of order and start with item 50 of 2025 on the agenda for this evening, and it's being presented by Councilman Mr. Salander and Councilwoman Ms. Ackerman. Mr. Salander.
Thank you, Mr. President. This resolution is to recognize Pastor Jacob Hawes, which unfortunately, he did reach out to me today. He was hoping to be here, but wasn't able to get past an illness, so he wasn't able to be here this evening. But to recognize him and Hope Community Church, as well as all the other the citizens and so forth, and community members that showed their passion for our community by raising almost $15,000 to pay off the student lunch debt at Oregon City Schools. And I just wanted to just say that it was such an exhibit of heart and love for our community and for our children, and I feel it really should inspire us all. that, you know, we realize that maybe we are, as ourselves, can't do everything, but together we can make quite a positive impact on our entire community and on the schools as well. So, you know, when we work together, we can change the lives of many people for the better. And that's the power of working together as a community. And so I wanted to recognize them. So on behalf of myself, the city council and the city of Oregon, we just want to say thank you. And I want to recognize also Carol Molnar, Dan Savage, and Jerry Eversman back there from the school board that are here as well for this. And also Jeremiah Deagle from Christ United Methodist, that they also assisted with this whole thing that was spearheaded and really done and really run with by Hope Community Church. So thank you so very much. Now, I don't know if anybody has anything they would like to come to the podium to say, or? No? Okay. Good.
Thank-
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So with that being said, I would like to ask council if there are any questions on item 50 of 2025. Hearing none, I will assign item 50 of 2025 as resolution 50 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
A resolution recognizing Hope Community Church of the Nazarene and community members for their donation efforts to eliminate the outstanding student lunch debt balance for the Oregon City School District.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Salander.
I'd like to make a motion for passage of Resolution 50 of 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Ackerman. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Solander?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Pauloff?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes. Thank you. Resolution 50 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The reason I moved that forward tonight on our agenda, we'll go back to our persons and delegations. But at this time, sir, if you'd like to stick around, you're more than welcome to. If you'd like to go, please feel free. And our school board members, I know they're busy as well. So if you'd like to get up and leave, please feel free to. Thank you. We did honor the church and the pastor last Tuesday at our board meeting as well. And so we applaud the city council in doing so as well. So good thing for our community. Positive. Thank you, Mr. Eversman. Good evening, everybody. Okay, first item on the agenda is persons and delegations. We will start out with Mr. Steve Dunaway. Mr. Dunaway, if you would please come up, state your name and address for the record.
Steve Dunaway, 24 South Coy. Still, had an ordeal happen here in this building, which has really changed how I now look at you people and how I look at the people that work for us. We have people that unless everyone on this council acts in certain manners and certain ways, we are doing a disservice to, because people like them over there, they saved people's lives, and I died in this building on January 9th, and they didn't let me. And I applaud the paramedics, Blake and Mr. Poloff, that came out and refused to not take me to a hospital that was essentially on bypass. They said, no, we have a citizen of Oregon that needs your immediate help, and that's where I went, over to St. B's, and I was told, no, you're going to go either to Toledo, or they were taking me to Flower. And it's because of them people that I'm still on the planet today. So I'm saying right now, we are going to start having a whole lot more hoopla for our city, or I'm coming down like a load of brick on you people.
Mr.
All
Dunaway,
right.
please, we
All
do
right.
not address, we
All
can
right.
address council,
All right.
but we have to do it politely.
Okay, I'm going to do it politely then. I am tired of complaining to this city when people want to have a hoopla about, oh, let's go over and pick up the rubbish at the Tarda bus stop. Tarda is a taxing agency, and under state law and state code, They're supposed to take care of those bus stops. They're supposed to be paved, rubbish, and everything else. And yet we have to have a kumbaya, and we have to have a person on this council, oh, we got to go clean it up and clean it up, but they don't worry about the derelict car that I've been complaining about that's been in front of his house since last end of summer. It's a derelict car that was in a wreck, and that's against the law or code in Oregon. You'll tell people to move them, but it just sits there. And it just sits there. We treat normal citizens one way, and because you might sit on this council, we treat you another. Not anymore. Just like when you make certain calls to certain people, but you get called out on that evil Facebook that you're full of wind and stuff. Well, no, you're not full of wind. I know more about you people than you know about me, because you can't ask questions about me, but I can ask questions about you. And I can get a load of stuff on you people. You know what? You should have a nice conversation with the people down in Columbus in the ethics area in regards to when you should recuse yourself of a vote and when you should not. We have a member on this council who has problems with taxes. Probably don't like taxes. We're never, ever going to raise taxes. And there should be a recusal. And I got that straight from Columbus. And they're sending me the paperwork to file the complaint on it. I had to file a FOIA with our wonderful attorney today because they said, you haven't taken it far enough to get it initiated. So it's initiated, correct? Because, yeah, there should have been a recusal on a vote to support those people who save lives. 3 weeks ago, Monday, this city was in a really bad situation. And correct me if I'm wrong, please. We had all 4 of our units out. The 2 EMT trucks were out and the 2 paramedic trucks were out. And we had 6 runs come in. And we had to call Northwood for reciprocal aid. And they're a volunteer department. And you know what? If I would have been the one in that office up there bleeding with what I had going on with me, I wouldn't have lasted. And we wouldn't have been talking to my wife about where you're taking me. You'd have been talking about why I died in the city office building, because we were real short on proper help. We had an opportunity to raise taxes. We're looking at things where we're going to, we can't mow the grass. We can't do this. We can't do that. I told you guys almost a year ago. Revenue is the answer. We have to do something about revenue. Nope, we didn't do that. We had 2 people thought we could, but you didn't let us. We're the only ones that can agree to a tax increase, but your vote don't count for nothing. Think about that. We couldn't have council approve to let us, I would have been canceled out. I was for the money. I was for the tax increase. My neighbor wasn't. I'd have been canceled out.
Mr. Dunaway, would you
So-
please address us, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
But you see my point.
We have about a minute left.
All right,
Thank you.
a minute left. I also have filed a complaint, and I'm going to take care of the Facebook stuff. This is a means of communicating with the citizens. We don't download these to the city. Everything on this that you do when you're engaging citizens is a public record, and it must be maintained. I have made formal requests to the state of Ohio to force all this stuff, that if it's used for that purpose, it'll be once and for all brought into the IT people and downloaded. It's a public record,
Thank you.
and we don't do that. So get ready. I'm
Thank you.
pissed.
Thank you, Mr. Dunaway.
Mr. President? Mr. President?
Ms. Ackerman?
Mr. Dunaway, despite your vitriol, despite your resentment toward me and your hell-bent determination to get rid of me, I am very happy that you survived your ordeal. And I'm very grateful to the city, our resources. They saved my brother with a stroke. They saved you. They're very valuable. I appreciate, I just want you to know that despite your feelings for me, I don't hold any ill will against you. And I look forward to your, interaction with the city.
I'm
So
sure the people on council know who I'm speaking about. Didn't use no names. you know what? We can do a whole lot more for this city if we would act like that mayor did last week on the news. Building up this city on what a wonderful place it is to live, how we want people to come and do business here, and how we'd love to have people come to vacation. We have people from all over the world come here to vacation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was the nicest thing I've ever heard about my city, other than the fact that,
Thank,
Nick might beat you with a door.
thank,
Those people will save your life.
thank you, Mr. Dunaway. Next on our list is
You're welcome.
Next on our list is Karen Egan. If you would please come up and state your name and address for the record. Excuse me.
My name is Karen Egan, and I live at 4755 Brown Road. My original concern or questions were in regards to the mowing. The mayor came in and sat with me and explained everything because we live across from a ditch. So I was concerned about the ditch. I mean, we have acreage, we have farmers and stuff, but he clarified that. So I'm under the assumption that the ditches will continue to be cleaned. But another question I have is, all of us have been dealing with the Lucas County auditor and the tax raises and situations with the housing. Have you guys as a whole met with the auditor or with the commissioners to represent like the citizens as to concerns of what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what they're going to do to fix it?
Ms. Egan. Mr. Major.
The auditor's office did come here and have their, they kind of did like a road show, and citizens can come in and challenge their property valuations. As for, I'm assuming you're talking about the data error as they're referring
Yeah,
to it.
because we attended that. We were scheduled for that. I mean, to me, I feel like as a group, you could maybe get better answers if you met with them than them coming to the citizens or what they say on the news. Because like some of you, I know, because my husband and I have done a lot of research, and a lot of people got like 20% increase, and we got 80%. So of course, we're in the process of fighting everything.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if you, one, ever attend a commissioners meeting, because Lucas County does affect us, and if you've met with them.
I've met with I didn't meet, I've conversed with the auditor directly on a few occasions as this was going on. And I'm set to follow up with her when, as they've kind of formulated a plan now to get a better understanding of what it is they're going to do for the citizens that are affected by the data error.
Okay.
So I can always, when I hear back, I can always report back to council and the council meeting and see where that lands.
All right,
Min-
thank you.
Ms. Egan, sorry, I know that there's a meeting coming up. Please, I couldn't tell you the date that's coming up at Jerusalem Township, that we were able to go and question that, and it's gonna be at their fire hall. Does anybody, I know it's coming up in the next week or so. Or,
I'll check and
but
see.
I'm not exactly sure,
Okay.
so, I mean, if you probably
Right.
Google something, you could probably
Right.
find it as well.
Mr. President.
February, next Tuesday. No, it's tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay.
Yeah, February 25th, at 12 to 7 at the Jerusalem Township Hall.
All right, thank you.
You're more than welcome. Mr. Mayor?
I was just gonna say mine went up approximately 80% of valuation, but the tax, because it's a fairly complicated formula that determines the amount you pay, my tax actually went up about 20%. I don't know if you're relative to,
Yeah.
it went up about, like I said, 80% of the valuation when it went up 80%, but my tax cost went up like 20%.
Yeah, ours was a little more significant, so.
That's right.
I don't mind paying taxes, I just don't want to cover everything.
Mr. President,
Yes,
Mrs.
Ms.
Egan,
Ackerman.
we had, one of our properties went up 116%. We had multiple properties on our road that went well over 80%, some close to 100. I do think that, evil social media was it was their fault that the county was forced to have to deal with the outrage of the citizens. It was a vehicle that people used to reach out to them in a climate where, what's your recourse? You know, you're one person, they isolate your problem. What did we see? We saw them come back with a list, and I'll never forget, I'm looking at this list, and I've got an app on my phone, I'm putting in the addresses, and I'm finding the Oregon citizens and that were getting reviewed. And then yet there's more, another list is sent out to be reviewed. And it's that pressure from the social media and the outrage from the citizens having a voice, having a vehicle for it, that I believe personally, that is why the county said, hey, all right, we're gonna take another look, and lo and behold, they found errors. So you're not alone in that we had substantial number of homes that went well over 80% in their valuation. And now look what's happening. They're resending a lot of those and reviewing a lot of those. Don't give up hope.
Oh, I'm not. We're in the process.
Thank you.
Ms. Egan, also, Ms. Rawson just showed me that Oakshade Grove is having one February 26th, so that's Wednesday from 12 to 7. And the other one that says Maumee Parkway Place Banquet Hall, but it doesn't give the timer. I can't see the time or the date of it. But at least there's a couple of them. It would be after the 26th, the one in Maumee.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
And
you
that's
so
for any
much.
other citizen that would like to know that as well. Next up on our list is Mr. Cervantes. Mr. Cervantes, if you would please give your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Philip Cervantes. I reside at 1440 South Stadium Road. And ladies and gentlemen of council, Your Honor, I'm right here. I stopped at the news tonight when I heard the news tonight. And I have complained many times because of the ditch located in front of my property, which it extends from Pickle to Brown Road. The weeds grow sometimes higher than the crest of the road. I ask, they cut the weeds fall to the bottom of the ditch is filling, our tiles don't run, but I do have a good rapport with the city of Oregon. They do come out and they do help. And now that, Mayor, you explained everything, thank you, because you put my mind at rest. I thought you wanted me to get my fat butt down there and cut those weeds, and I just can't do it, I'm too old and fat. But thank you, ladies and gentlemen of council, it's all been explained, and I just wanted to thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
President, I'd like
Cervantes.
a quick response. Is
Mr. Mayor.
that one of the things, if you had heard on the news tonight on the 13 News, was people said the cost of saving money. That's really not a money saving thing. But what it does do, if we aren't out cutting right away and people are cutting their own, we have more time to get to the ditches because we have them on a priority
God love
basis.
ya. I
So
like what you're
that's
saying.
part of the deal.
Thank you. I'm sorry I took so much of your time.
Thank you, Mr.
Have a good evening.
Cervantes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next on our list is Mr. Jerry Peach. Jerry, if you would, name and address for the record.
Thank you. Jerry Peach, 6113 Navarre Avenue, right here in Oregon. I haven't been here for quite a while, and I know procedures have changed periodically. I want to commend you, Councilman Reeves, for listening to people at the beginning of the meeting who may have an issue completely unrelated to anything that may be there on the agenda. Hasn't always been the case, and I think that speaks well for
Thank
you
you.
and for council. I'm here on the issue that the mayor commented on earlier. I can assure you I've not been misled by social media.
We know that.
I was unaware that there was an issue, what seems to me to be a new issue regarding the cutting of the right-of-way, cutting of swales, using city equipment built for that purpose, city equipment that is weighted, can deal with swales that may look shallow, but if you're on them, not so
Right.
much. And my concern would be that the city would use that equipment and those employees in a a manner different than they have been using that equipment and different than the expectation of people who live in the country mostly. I know the issue was taken up in 2013, April and May, the question of should the city continue to cut the right-of-way, cut the roadsides, or discontinue that practice and shift that responsibility onto adjoining property owners. In 2013, there was a consensus of those on council and the administration, the city administrators specifically, that a fair compromise might be that the city, because of cost, would mow the right-of-way less, but would continue that practice. And that it was it was rather a trade-off, a fair trade-off, that those in the urban half of Oregon received leaf pickup, those in the rural part of Oregon, not so much. In the rural half, people who have long stretches of parcels, long stretches of roadway, would find it difficult to maintain those with the equipment they have. And so any effort the city makes to continue that practice, as the mayor indicated, that'll be appreciated. I can tell you that I was unaware of any changes until Sunday night, when I got called informing me that the right-of-way issue was back on the agenda. I have to believe there's still misunderstanding, a lack of notice and publication to the public out there. And so although the mayor seems to believe that it's really a miscommunication, I would encourage you to, at some point, return this to committee for more discussion and more publication.
Thank you, Mr. Peach.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Last person that signed in to speak tonight is Omar Shmidi. Mr. Shmidi, if you would please come up, state your name and address for the record. We're going to try to keep it down to approximately 4 to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Omar Smady, 2949 Camelot. I just wanted to, Mr. Roman, I just wanted to ask you a quick question, because I noticed since the detour, at Navarre Avenue, Dearborn, since that's been in progress, I noticed traffic gets backed up, and that's a long light there at Wheeling. And I just wondered if the city public services was looking at that and noticing any traffic backups.
So, Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Roman.
I know, and, Keith Henninger is out in the audience, our street superintendent, and I know we changed the timing on Wheeling for northbound to help relieve some of that congestion for Wheeling. It depends on what time of day and rush hour you expect that there will be the backup at rush hour. We did get some complaints on Ansonia and Grasser, people cutting through their properties that want to go south on Wheeling, and we put up barriers that said, no through traffic, and we think that's helped a little there. But beyond that, I don't think we've noticed too much more than what we expected.
So the city did make an adjustment to the light there
Oh,
at
yeah.
Wheeling.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't aware, because it's a really long light, actually.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidi. If there's nothing further, I am going to start with our next item. The next item on the agenda for this evening is item number 28 of 2025. These items were presented and discussed at the committee of the whole meeting. This one is presented by Mr. Borton and the mayor, and Mr. Borton is out this evening. Council, is
Mr.
there any
President?
questions? Mr. Mayor.
I was just going to say that all the items that we presented prior, other than the 3 that we could address, we have no changes to. And we believe we would be here to answer them, but we would not speak to them unless somebody asked.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. So with that being said, council, are there any additional questions on item 28 of 2025? I will assign item 28 of 2025 as ordinance 28 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and commissioner of recreation and parks to enter into an agreement with Ace Diversified Services LLC, DBA Ace Sanitation, 1750 Trade Road, Holland, Ohio, for portable restroom facilities for the 2025 season, exchange for 720 waste tickets to be used at the city's wastewater treatment plant. This amount is equivalent to $54,000 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 28 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Second?
Well, second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Thank you. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Mr. Salander. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Slander,
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula, Mr. Reeves.
Yes. Thank you. Ordinance 2028 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 5 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 29 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 29 of 2025? Hearing no objections or any additional questions, I will assign item 29 of 2025 as ordinance 29 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and commissioner of recreation and parks to issue a purchase order to Outdoor Home Services LLC, DBA True Green, P.O. Box 9001033, Louisville, Kentucky, for fertilization and weed control during the 2025 season in an amount of $34,985 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 29 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Thank you, Mr. Salander. Any objections? Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Slander,
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman, Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes. Thank you. Ordinance 2029 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item is item 30 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 30 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 30 of 2025 as ordinance 30 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the Parks and Recreation Commissioner to issue a purchase order with Ad Choice, Inc., Clear Images, Mr. Emblem, RCX Sports LLC, BCN Sports, and All American Sports Corp. for uniforms on an per-item basis through December 31st, 2025, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 30 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Salander, Mr. Salander, excuse me. Any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Slander,
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes. Thank you, council. Ordinance 30 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas to 0 nays. Mr. Salander, I absolutely, positively apologize for that. Right where your name, where I wrote your name at, it says Mrs. Next, so
Yeah,
I
that's okay.
apologize.
That's okay.
That wasn't done deliberately, so please
I
forgive me.
understand. Yeah,
Thank
forgiven.
you, sir. The next item on the agenda is item number 31 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 31 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 31 of 2025 as ordinance 31 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders with Demetria Jacobs Engineering, Inc., 1101 Research Drive, Toledo, Ohio, to provide professional engineering services and technical support for the Oregon Water and Wastewater Treatment Plants Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, SCADA systems on an as-needed basis and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Ross and council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 31 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Thank you, Mr. Salander. Any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mr. Cylinder.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mrs. Pauloff.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes. Thank you. Ordinance 31 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item number 32 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 32 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 32 of 2025 as ordinance 32 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders with Salomon Diving, Inc., 6450 Stadler Road, Monroe, Michigan, for diving inspection services on an as-needed basis and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 32 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Mr. Drake. Any objections? Ms. Ross, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mrs. Pauloff.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Ordinance 32 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item is item number 34 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 34 of 2025? Excuse me. I skipped 33. That's my fault. So we'll go with item 33 of 2025. Are there any additional questions on item 33 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 33 of 2025 as ordinance 33 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders with Bowser Morner, 1419 Miami Street, Toledo, Ohio, for materials and laboratory testing, engineering, and construction inspection services on an as-needed basis and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 33 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mrs. Pauloff.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
No. Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 33 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item is item number 34 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 34 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 34 of 2025 as ordinance 34 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders with TTL Engineering Services LLC, 1915 North 12th Street, Toledo, Ohio, for construction material inspection and laboratory testing services on an as-needed basis and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 34 of 2025, as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Mr. Salander. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mrs. Pauloff.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes. Thank you. Ordinance 34 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item on the agenda is item 35 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 35? Hearing none, I will assign item 35 as ordinance 35 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders with Verdontis LLC, 1915 North 12th Street, Toledo, Ohio, for materials and laboratory testing, engineering, and environmental services on an as-needed basis and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 35 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Any objections? Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mrs. Paula.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 35 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item is item number 36 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 36 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 36 of 2025 as ordinance 36 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders with Quality Control Inspection, Inc., QCI, Inc., 9500 Midwest Avenue, Garfield Heights, Ohio, to provide construction inspection services on an as-needed basis and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 36 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mrs. Paula.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 36 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Next item on the agenda is item number 37 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 37 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 37 of 2025 as ordinance 37 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders with DGL Consulting Engineers LLC, 3455 Briarfield Boulevard, Suite E, Maumee, Ohio, to provide professional engineering, survey, and inspection services for various traffic analysis and projects on an as-needed basis and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 37 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mrs. Paula.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman. Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 37 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 38 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 38 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 38 of 2025 as ordinance 38 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders with Davy Resource Group, 333 Martinell Drive, Kenton, Ohio, for invasive species, vegetation control, and management services on an as-needed basis and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 38 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you,
Second.
Mr. Horniak. Do we have a second?
Second.
Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Ackerman, I didn't hear it. Thank you. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, a second by Ms. Ackerman. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mrs. Paula.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 38 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 39 of 2025. Council, any additional questions on item 39 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 39 of 2025 as ordinance 39 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders with West Erie Realty Solutions LTD, 323 Lafayette Street, Toledo, Ohio, to provide professional right-of-way appraisal and real estate acquisition services on an as-needed basis and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 39 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mrs. Paulo.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes,
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
thank you. Ordinance 39 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item on the agenda is item number 40 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 40 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 40 of 2025 as ordinance 40 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor, director of public service, and the finance director to issue purchase orders to United Systems and Software, Inc., P.O. Box 54791 Southwest 1 Boulevard, Benton, Kentucky, for the purchase of electric remote transmitters, or ERTs, for the City of Oregon Water Distribution Division and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 40 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mrs. Paulo.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes,
Mr. Slander.
Yes.
thank you. Ordinance 40 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 41 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 41 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 41 of 2025 as ordinance 41 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor, director of public service, and the finance director to issue purchase orders to Buckeye State Pipe and Supply Co., Inc., 14680 Pleasant Valley Road, Chillicothe, Ohio, for the City of Oregon Water Distribution Division and the Department of Public Service and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 41 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, would you please read, or please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak.
Yes.
Mrs. Paulo.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes,
Mr. Slander.
thank you. Ordinance 41 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item on the agenda is item 42. Council, are there any additional questions on item 42 of 2025?
Mr. President, Just
Ms.
wanna-
Ackerman?
I would just like to confirm with the city, you're going to be willing to mow along this bike trail? Just checking.
Mr. Major?
Yep, Mr. President, yes, we are planning to continue mowing along bike trails.
Ms. Ackerman, is that it?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman.
Sorry, I was.
Um,
in and out.
Are there any additional questions on item 42 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 42 of 2025 as ordinance 42 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record, please.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to enter into an agreement with Kleinfelder, 1168 North Main Street, Bowling Green, Ohio, for professional engineering services for the Oregon Multi-Use Trail Bikeway, LUC Phase 5, PID 121105, in an amount not to exceed $46,300 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 42 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Slander?
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 42 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item on the agenda is item 43 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 43 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 43, 2025 as ordinance 43 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to sign amendment number 1 with Bureau Group Architecture and Engineering, Inc., 314th Conant Street, Maumee, Ohio, for additional design engineering services for the street department garage facility 2024 in a total amount not to exceed $5,980 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 43 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Council, we have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Slander?
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 43 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item is on the agenda is item number 44 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 44 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 44 of 2025 as ordinance 44 of 2025, or excuse me, resolution. It's, it is
Ordinance.
ordinance 44 of 2025, and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it in the record.
Amending Schedule 3 of the Traffic Code of the Codified Ordinances of Oregon by establishing a 6,000-pound weight limit on a portion of Pickle Road in the city of Oregon and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 44 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Mr. Drake. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Slander?
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 44 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item number 45 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 45 of 2025?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Ackerman.
would someone please just give the audience a brief, it's a very small description there, not really much of a description, just somebody just give a real brief little synopsis of that.
Mr. Roman?
Yes, Mr. President, and Mrs. Ackerman. This was presented last week, but it is a resolution basically stating what the city has already done or has done for a lot of years. But complete streets is a philosophy that when you are planning for a new street or the design or changes in the right of way, it is to accommodate all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, joggers, truckers, the emergency operators, and to plan out a right of way that tries to accommodate as many as possible. And we've always done that. But when we apply for grants for road work, you have a resolution or ordinance that says you follow it. And we didn't. And I felt like, well, okay, you could score better if this resolution passed, but it's pretty much what we already do. So if you read through it, it's just saying, taking into account all users in your planning of the road in terms of maintenance or capital improvements and so on.
Thank you, Mr. Roman.
Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, are there any additional questions on item 45 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign ordinance 45 of 2025 as resolution 45 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
A resolution to express support of complete street principles.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of Resolution 45 of 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
By Ms. Pauloff.
Yes.
Was it? Okay.
Sure. Go ahead.
We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mrs. Pauloff,
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Slater.
Yes.
Thank you. Resolution of 45 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas and 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 46 of 2025. Council, any additional questions on item 46 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 46 of 2025 as ordinance 46 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to enter into a purchase agreement with Boundtree Medical LLC, 5,000 Tuttle Crossing Boulevard, Dublin, Ohio, for the purpose of purchasing medical supplies for 2025 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mrs. Pauloff.
I move for passage of ordinance 46 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. We have a motion by Ms. Pauloff, second by Mr. Horniak. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Ross, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Pauloff,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Slater.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 46 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas and 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 47 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 47 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 47 of 2025 as ordinance 47 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Declaring the intent to vacate the 50-foot wide Wesley Street from Finley Avenue to the north line of lots 64 and 82 in the East Hollywood addition in the city of Oregon, Ohio.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Pauloff.
I move for passage of ordinance 47 of 2025.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. We have a motion by Ms. Pauloff, second by Mr. Horniak. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Ross, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Pauloff,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Slater.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 47 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 48 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 48 of 2025?
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Pauloff.
I would like it to be on the record that I'm recusing myself because even though I am no longer on any boards with the Historical Society, I was on the board during the processing of this grant. So I am recusing myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Mr. President, if I'm a member of the Historical Society, do I need Ms. Purpura? Can I vote or not?
Mr. President, Ms.
Yes.
Ackerman, I would recommend that you recuse yourself also.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. President. That being said, as a member, I recuse myself as well.
Not gonna pass then.
Yeah, I don't know what.
Yeah, what do you want us to do?
So that leaves 3 voting members. I'm sorry, Mr. President, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
So that leaves 3 voting members. Can we vote on that with 3 voting members and have that approved, especially as an emergency measure?
Can we table it?
Okay, do we need a motion and a second to table?
Ms.
So I move for passage of ordinance 48 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
We need a second.
Do we have a second?
Second, so that when, then he can table it.
Then we can table.
Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Drake,
What's that?
a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Drake.
The only thing, Mr. President, I'm not a member, at least I don't have a card or paid any dues. I did go on a bus trip once and,
You'll have to leave
Southern Ohio, so I don't want to get locked up for taking a free trip.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, a second by Mr. Drake.
You want to ask if there's objections first?
Yeah. Council, any objections?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I would move to table ordinance 48 of 2025 to a later date when all council members can be here and we can vote affirmative.
Thank you. At this time, it's going to be item 48 of 2025. Are there any objections? I doubt, but are there any objections? It will be tabled until we have a quorum. Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is item number 49 of 2025. Council, are there any additional questions on item 49 of 2025?
Mr. President.
Mr. Horniak.
I just have a question, and perhaps for Joel. Has there been any update or movement in Senate Bill 56 in the last week that's anything significant relative to this?
Mr. President, Mr. Horniak, I mean, nothing significant. I mean, they are still working through this process, but the the portion of the excise tax that would come to local governments is still in jeopardy. So, but they did, there were some hearings on this, and it looks like they were lowering that excise tax back down to 10% because they had it going up to 15%. Looks like they're lowering it back down to 10%. The local government portion still is in jeopardy. And there were some other rules and restrictions that were added that are being contemplated right now, but still being worked through. But it appears as though this will be resolved at the state budget level. So by July 1st, I'm anticipating that we'll have a resolution on this at the state level.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. If there aren't any additional questions, or
Mr.
Mr.
President, sorry.
Salander?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had one other question. Do we know of any licenses that are close to being approved within the city of Oregon?
No, Mr. President.
Yes.
Mr. Slander. There are no licenses that have been approved. I'll have to defer to Mr. Shrake. I believe there was one license somebody had applied for, but they're nowhere close to completing that process unless, Mr. Shrake, you have any updates.
Mr. Shrake?
Mr. President, there was just an inquiry. That inquiry has since been dispensed with. We have not had any licensing requests because they would first have to obtain the license through the state of Ohio Cannabis Control. And once that has been granted, then they can do a site selection following the state of Ohio's rules.
And Mr. President and Mr. Slander, at the time we checked, we thought there was one application in at the state level. Is that still, the application still in the state level? And that was for the, just so everybody knows, this is a reference to the shed property. That was the one that was in question. We thought there was an application. Don't know if that's still there or not.
Mr. President, unaware if that has been pulled from the state application. It was a Michigan company that was doing the inquiry, and they would then occupy space within the shed location, but we have not heard anything since the initial inquiry.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Salander?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yep, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions on item 49 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 49 of 2025 as resolution 49 of 2025, and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Imposing a moratorium on the granting of building permits of certificates of occupancy for any building structure, use, or change of use that would enable the retail sale of cannabis in dispensaries for a period not to exceed 9 months from the effective date of this resolution in order to allow City Council and the Planning Commission to review applicable Ohio statutes, criminal codes, and the City of Oregon zoning code relative to such use and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paula?
I move for passage of ordinance, or I'm sorry, resolution 49 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Ross, or Ms. Paula. Second?
No.
It's,
I believe it came from the other end.
second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Salander. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Ross, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mr. Slander?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes. Thank you. Resolution 49 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Our next item on the agenda is item 30. Excuse me, is item 51 of 2025 being presented by the mayor and public service director, Mr. Roman. We'll go right to Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This resolution is needed to state that the city intends to proceed with eminent domain with 2 property owners for the Navarre Avenue safety improvement if we cannot come to some agreement. In order to actually proceed with eminent domain, there is a need of another ordinance. And if currently we are negotiating with the 2 remaining property owners, one, we are very close to them signing. The other, we are still a little bit further apart. We believe both will come to an agreement here in a month, but we do have to certify right away by the beginning of April. And this first resolution is the process for eminent domain if you have to go to that. So this is just stating our intent. Again, there'd be another ordinance to actually proceed to eminent domain later on. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, are there any questions on item 51 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 51 of 2025 as resolution 51 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Declaring the necessity and intention of council to appropriate certain easement and property interests to construct various improvements known as the LUCSR 2-21.72 Navarre Avenue Safety PID 118234 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paula.
I move for passage of ordinance 51 of 2020.
Resolution?
Is it a resolution?
Yeah.
Okay.
I move for passage of ordinance 51 of 2020.
Resolution.
It's a resolution.
Did I say it again? Sorry. Resolution 51 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mrs. Paula.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. We have a motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you both. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Slander?
Yes.
Thank you. Resolution 51 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas and 0 nays. The last item on the agenda for consideration and passage is item number 52 of 2025. It's being presented by the mayor, building and zoning commissioner, Mr. Schrake. We'll go, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And you'll see my name is presenting this. I inherited this. It was actually a request by several council members to address the cutting of noxious weeds in the right-of-way. And after listening to all the dialogue that took place during the committee of the whole and committee meeting, and just really since this property maintenance code passed in the summer of last year, listening, putting together the thoughts is what you see here before you. Really, the difference between what is already passed in our property maintenance code and what you have before you is really the significant difference is changing the cut height from 10 inches to 8 inches. Mr. Schrake did clarify a couple things in the body of the ordinance, and I'll let him speak to that. But Mr. Drake brought up about the 3 readings. And of course, we've used that many times in the past. And the reason that council wanted to get this on and moving as soon as possible was to make people aware of the fact that there might be a change in what they are going to be required to do. And so getting it on and coming to a decision before it was time to actually cut the grass seemed to be a good idea. So if you did request 3 readings, which we certainly don't have a problem with, one of them would be today, one would be the 10th of March, one would be the 24th of March, and it would go into effect 30 days after. So towards the latter end of April, it would be enacted. And I think that would still give us plenty of time to make the cuts, and you'd achieve what your objective was, like by having it here early, would be to make people aware that there could be a change and they might have to do cutting where some don't. And to address Mr. Peach's concern, and he and I served a lot of years together. I have the utmost respect for Jerry. We're very, very good friends. And this topic come up probably, 10 times from the early 80s or from mid 80s. And it got a little bit addressed today. So that was some 30 some years later. But I know Jerry was very passionate about it. It caused us to come at odds at times, but our friendship, I think, overcame that. And we would still be trying to take into consideration any oddities in the right of way where it would be hard for people to cut, where the city would prevail and make sure those situations were addressed. And if people had any concerns, they would contact us, and if they fall into that category, we would try to help them out and cut that right away. So if you move for 3 readings, somebody did, I know it takes 3, but I don't think anybody would be an objection to that. We administratively certainly would not be. And at any time during the course of that, before the final reading, you could move to amend if something came up that you weren't comfortable with during that roughly 30 days from today. So that's what I have to say. Mr. Schrake could clarify the change he made in the body that just clarifies that one part. It's a small part, but that's what we would present.
Thank you.
And like I said, once again, we presented it from what we absorbed from the conversation that took place in really since the end of summer when you passed the property maintenance code.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Schrake.
Mr. President, members of council, the administration and the Drainage and Streets Building and Lands Committee referred this question to regulating grass height and grass cutting within the city of Oregon to the Building and Zoning Department. I'd like to point out that in section 915.01, duty of property owner, any persons owning or having charge of land within the city shall throughout the year keep the same free and clear of all noxious weeds, rank vegetation, and uncontrolled grasses, and shall cut or cause to be cut all such weeds, grasses, and vegetation on lots owned by him as necessary to prevent such rank growth and/or the maturing or spreading of seeds or pollen thereof in conformance with this chapter. I'd like to make a point that in my research, that initial sentence, any person owning or having charge of land within the city shall throughout the year keep the same free and clear of all noxious weeds, rank vegetation, has been in our code since the inception of Oregon Municipal Code, 1958. That language has not changed, and it's not changing today or being proposed to be changed today. This is then gone before council in 1961, same language. 1998, same language. What I have added is, for the purpose of this chapter, the owner, occupant, or other person or entity having charge of land abutting a public right-of-way shall be deemed to have charge of that half of the right-of-way on the side of his or her land, just as a clarification of what it already says. The other thing by adding that is it aligns with what was previously approved in the property maintenance code. The property maintenance code, which is adopted, same language throughout this country, reads, premises and exterior property shall be maintained free from weeds or plant growth in excess of, and then they indicate that we are to establish an amount. So they leave it with a line for us to add, and at the time, 10 inches was our threshold. The definition in the property maintenance code further explains that exterior property is the open space on the premises and on adjoining property under the control of owners and operators of such premises. The definition of premises is a lot, plot, or parcel of land, easement, or public way, including any structures thereon. So in the property maintenance code, they clarified what, in their boilerplate language, what is exterior property, what is premises. So what I've added in 915.01 is just to align with what's already in the property maintenance code in clarification. In discussion, there, as it's been brought up, there were some discussion that it should go to 6 inches or 8 inches or 10 inches. So I was asked to look at what other municipalities have done. And with Oregon previously at 10 inches, Maumee, Perrysburg, and Toledo are at 8 inches. And this is the threshold for violation. Rossford and Sylvania are 6 inches, and Waterville is 12 inches. So it was thought that we would go with the middle of the road and with what is the standard for the majority of the communities surrounding us and go with the 8-inch threshold. I also clarified that natural landscapes may not include turf grass lawns left unattended for the purpose of returning to a natural state or be planted in the right-of-way. And that is to prevent someone who just decides, I don't want to mow anymore, so I'm going to call it a natural area. The property maintenance code is very specific about that, and it must be a cultivated natural plant. So if you till the earth just like you are a farmer and you plant natural habitat, flowers and wildflowers that are native to Ohio, that's okay. But if you just let it go fallow and let nature do its thing, that is still considered noxious weeds and uncontrolled grasses. Also clarified how that should be left when cut. So under 915.03 notice to cut, I've added and left in a clean and tidy appearance. So as the whole intent is that we want our community to look nice and clean and not someone just scalping the earth and letting it look like it needs to be raked up for hay. So the intent was that it's done just as any homeowner typically does with their lawn, and they either pick it up or they mulch it or something of that nature. Finally, under 91504, cutting by city billing assessment, the assessment has been in our code since 1998. And in 1998, the assessment was $125 per hour. Here we are in 2025. Gas prices have gone up. Equipment has gone up. Labor prices have gone up. We have not recouped or recovered our costs to abate a nuisance. So that is why that is being elevated to $200, which isn't a huge jump in inflation if you consider how long we've had it since 1998 at $125. The last section, number 2, is just amending the property maintenance code to reflect the desire to reduce from 10 inches to 8 inches. With that, I have nothing further, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Mr. Schrake. Mr. Mayor.
So in essence, the really thing I heard, Mr. Schrake said he filled in 8 inches with the bit of the road, but we kind of heard a lot here, especially last week. I know some people said 8. I remember Mr. Salinger saying 6 inches. I remember hearing other people say maybe 6, maybe 8.
Right.
So what you really do is you have to come up to that decision by March 24th.
Okay.
That's all.
Council, any questions?
Mr. President, I rise to a
Ms.
question
Ms.
of
Ackerman?
privilege, please.
I'm sorry?
I rise to a question of privilege, please.
Okay.
The mayor is in error. The meeting that was held, that Mr. Drake held for his committee was not, there was no audit, there was not, it was not audible. There was a meeting. The public was not made aware of it for such serious matters. That maybe to some people are frivolous, but for some people it's going to be exceptional amount of cost and organization to achieve. The mayor has cited twice that there was a great discussion last week about this. The only mention made of it at all was by Mr. Major about the height. He just said, we're looking at going to 8 inches. There was no discussion. There was no discussion. And as to my asking at the onset of this meeting for this to be revisited was per the regular meeting minutes of February 10th, Mr. Drake, who is the, excuse me, who, that is his committee, he's a committeeman. He stated he held a drainage, roads, buildings, and lands committee meeting regarding the city mowing right-of-ways in town and out east. There seems to be a consensus to have another meeting on the max height of grass before they move to enforcement. You totally ignored that. I don't know where this conversation took place, where you had this second conversation, or that you had any kind of conversation or give or take last week on this issue. In fact, at the very end during Mr. Major's report is when Mr. Major said, hey, we're going to look at adding this into the agenda next week. And that was it. So I think you're being misleading to the public, but with that said, I just want to make that a matter of record that you were giving some inaccuracies there to the public about what any conversation that took place between council members. Maybe you did it on your own privately, I don't know, but it didn't occur in a public setting. And being that the meeting had no audio, again, I would ask this council to please, I mean, since some of you on council decided public doesn't need to know, we're just going to implement this. We don't need their input. This is what we decided. So, but I will say, I do want that to be a matter of record, and that the 3 readings is the very least that this body can do to give the public opportunity to respond to again, like I said to Mr. Major earlier today, you have more than just a grass height change in this language. and it's not clear. And you went from $125 per hour. The language says that the citizens would get a minimum charge of $200 per parcel cut. There's nothing in this language that says it's a per hour rate. Per parcel cut, to me, is if someone has 5 acres and someone has 80 acres, that means the city's gonna do this. There's nothing about per hour here, and there's just that there's a minimum. So I believe the public has a right to know what's going to be expected of them. And I also was told that this is based on lots. Then you're telling me that the language is to address right-of-ways, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do really feel that there are several things that are not clear and are misleading and hadn't been discussed sufficiently for the public to respond to. So at the very least, I don't know, I'm not sure how to do it. I don't believe you've done this very many times where you have required the 3 readings. But how do we?
It's very easy. That's a really, really simple process. But once again, I did state that really the only change, no matter how complicated you want to make it sound, is just picking the height. It's
in
simply,
red.
and you are correct. It is just the minimum charge is 200. It didn't change the hourly rate, just the minimum charge. Mr. Schrake might have kind of slid past that, but it is just the minimum rate is.
So it'll be a
at 200.
minimum
So
rate.
the other hourly rate stays the same.
It will be 125 per hour.
That's correct.
And
Mr.
I was
President.
told by Mr.
Mhm.
Henninger, that's based on.
Mr. President, if I could,
Who-
regarding.
Mr. Roman.
Yeah, so when these go through, when there is a obnoxious weeds and it does go out and get cut, those hours are tracked, the equipment is tracked, and is sent over to the assessment office. That is put into a formula that's calculated based off the employee's rate, the supervisor's rate. So that all goes into it. The minimum is 125. I don't think I've ever seen a bill under $250. So although that minimum charge is going from 125 to 200, it's not really going to change what's being charged to the property owner.
So that, just to clarify, it is not $200 per hour. It's going to stay 125, but it will be a minimum charge of $200.
So, yeah, there's no set per hour because it's dependent on who all goes out to do it. So that 125 is not per hour. That's just strictly the minimum charge that could be charged. So if somebody went out for a quarter of an hour, cut it, and those total hours added up to under 125, the person would be charged 125 based on the minimum charge.
Okay, so can you clarify the language of a parcel, per parcel cut?
So that would just be per property. So if somebody had to go out to multiple properties or parcels, then it would be a minimum of 200 each time they go out for it.
So if one person owns, like I said, if you own a quarter-mile long parcel, and then another person has a 2-acre parcel, they're going to get that same minimum charge?
So no, nobody will get charged. It's going to be strictly based on the total number of hours and the equipment.
Well, they say it's very confusing because I was told several things today. One was that there would be a minimum charge of $200.
Yeah,
That's
that
correct.
would be the
Okay,
minimum. That is
so
correct.
no matter what size your parcel is,
The
if the
minimum
city
charge.
shows up, it's $200.
Correct.
So,
But it's more than likely going to be much more than $200.
okay,
That's
so
what
I
I'm
would
just
just, I would ask again one more time so that the citizens understand what they are going to be dealing with. This is citywide. This is not
Yes,
just
this
for,
happens.
yeah,
all-
this is the whole city,
We have
correct?
about 30 per year that people are already getting charged.
It's not just right of ways. We're talking about
Correct. Yep,
every
it's-
nuisance grass situation. I'm just trying to clarify that.
Correct.
So, yeah, I would still very much, because of the lack of conversation and the lack of involvement by the public, with the expectation that the city is going to have, or citizens would be taking on a lot. I did receive several calls from people that saw the blade I don't know, it wasn't social media that created the Blade article that was misleading and said that this was a done deal the day before we actually held the vote, which I don't know how many levels of improper that falls under. Maybe it was just a miscommunication. I don't know, but the public was misled. I received calls from property owners saying, if a farmer is paying rent based on the tillable acres of this parcel, then I'm paying taxes on to the middle of the road for the right of way. Then how am I, who's responsible for cutting the grass? And there's a lot of caveats. I don't think the average person who just takes their little rider out and scooches up and down in front of their house a couple of times is going to be dealing with. Are we talking about mowing around every, are the citizens themselves taking over, going around every utility pole, light pole, fire hydrant? Are we, where, there, we've got questions. And I think that would, I mean, they obviously, some council people, they've moved past that and they've made up their mind. That's fine between them and voters. But for some of us that are voting on this, we would ask at the very least that we have the three votes, and that the city also put this in the paper well before the time so that people can make arrangements to pay to have people cut it, what have you, because not everybody has mowers like some of us do. So I just think consideration of those people and our citizens, I would appreciate. I mean, we're kind of behind the eight ball now because they went ahead and did all this without public input, but here we are. So I would just ask now, what are the steps for going forward to have the three readings? Or is that only based on if it actually passes? What are we doing here?
Ms.
Mr.
Ackerman,
President.
just a minute. I'm not saying the public has been notified of how do I want to say, of the meetings that are on our website that, we speak here at our meetings here. We had, talked, Mr. Drake had set that meeting that, we were going to do our, building drainage and roads and talk about the grass cutting of the right of way. You even said during that meeting, and I'm not gonna, I can't say it verbatim of what you said,
At which
but you
meeting,
were
sir?
not opposed to it.
At which meeting, sir?
At one of the meetings when Mr. Drake said that that's what we were gonna set the meeting. You even sat right where you're at now, and you said, at that time, I believe I was sitting down at, I wasn't council president at the time, that you mentioned you did be something about beyond popular belief. I'm not against it.
Oh, no, I'm open for the discussion
No,
of.
that's not what
Right.
you said.
What did I say?
I just told you, it was something to the effect that you weren't opposed, that people might think you would be,
Mr. President,
Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to do something here. Let's take that $200 minimum out and leave it the way it was, 125. The only change then is you pick the height. It's not as cloudy as you think. You want to make it cloudy. I understand.
No, I
You
want to make
usually
it
do.
clear.
It is real clear. Everything has been this way for more than 10 years. Just a minute. Everything's been this way for more than 10 years. The only thing you would be changing is if you want to change it from 10 to 8 to 6, that's the only thing that changes. Because we don't have to worry about the minimum because the hourly rate's going to put it over the $200 anyways. To keep it clear, take that out.
So do
And
we,
the only thing you have to do is, I don't know, we're not trying to pull one over on this citizens, like you want to make, I know you want to always make me the bad guy, and I'm all right with that. Because I have to be the
Mr.
bearer of bad
President?
news to people all the time.
Mr.
And I'll do it.
President,
You
Just-
don't have the floor. Nobody
Just a minute.
interrupted
You
you, but
interrupted me,
you
but
always
go ahead.
interrupt people.
you interrupted me. but
Ms.
go ahead.
Ackerman, please.
So I want to say, we, as an administration, put together what council asked for. And we didn't pick the number. No one's picked it yet. Pick a damn number and put it in there by March 24th, and you'll have it. Nothing else is confusing. And if it was, it's been confusing for them for about 20 years. So they didn't know, people didn't rush in here and ask what explanation it was, because you've been here for over a year now, and how many people come in and ask about the noxious weed cutting? No one. So, only time the complaints we get is neighbors calling and say, hey, there's high weeds across the street from me. We want to get them cut. Most of the people would rather see it at 6 inches than 10 inches, but 8 inches is fair. If you want to change it to 7.5 or 7 7/8, I don't care what you do. Just pick a number and quit making it confusing.
Mr. Roman,
Mr. President?
Mr. Roman. No,
Well, Mr. President, I just want to note that the Roads and Drainage Committee, the bulk of our discussion was the height of the grass. That was the bulk of that discussion. And was it not recorded?
Of course.
No, there
No,
was
it
no
wasn't.
sound.
Was
Is
it recorded or
No.
a
not?
few weeks ago
No
it was.
sound.
It was not recorded because my phone blew up
Okay.
by about 20 citizens saying, where the hell's the sound at?
Well, so by precedent to,
Excuse me, Mr. Roman, just a
Well,
second. Ms. Ronson?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Every one of these meetings, of course, we do try our best to get it on YouTube for a live stream. However, we have been experiencing, some technical difficulties lately, as we know, but we do have our IT director actually in the other room troubleshooting issues, so we don't keep coming across these things. We actually have a new computer, so we are really trying to mitigate that. All of these meetings that we have in here are recorded by a secondary device right over there, and they are uploaded on Tuesday mornings to our website, to our city website. So every meeting that we've done in here this year is recorded and put on the website currently.
Mr. President?
Mr. Roman.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Ackerman, but so that recording is available to the public right now?
If you know how to do a Google Drive.
You're right. So maybe that's the better question. Making that meeting available to the public, if that can be done through the website, better, let's just say, then that at least, they could at least hear that, because the bulk of our discussion was the height. That was it, but yeah.
Yeah, but you guys did change the language significantly.
Understood
to-
for tonight's
So,
meeting. I
yeah,
understand
so-
that.
And I just want to point, it's certainly not, I'm not disparaging of you. I mean, it's technical difficulties. God forbid if somebody asked me to fix something, audio visual type things. But it was, if you don't know to go on the city website and go into a Google Drive agenda, you have to go, it's kind of backwards, everything. If you're looking for specific audio or meeting or what have you, you have to go in there and the average person, yeah, there's a lot of young people who probably get it or anything, but it's not so simple. You go in and you have to open up that year and then you kind of go backwards. And so the meeting is just a number. And so it's doable if you know how, but it's not the best that the city can do in informing the public. And I understand it was a snafu in the sound, but then last 2 weeks, we had double YouTube meeting video, which I understand was just a goof, but I had several people said, hey, I signed, I got on here, it would show number of people on to view a meeting. And then nothing was there, nothing was there, nothing was there. They would start to drop off of there. And they didn't know there were 2 different YouTube's channels going on at the same time. So all of those are just mistakes, accidents, what have you. But I believe that this needs to get put in the press. I think that for these readings, I think that we need to do the best that we can do to inform our citizens. And that's really all I'm asking for. I'm not making a judgment call about how many inches tall the grass should be, just so people know what to anticipate, because if they have to hire a mowing company, what have you, to take care of miles and miles of right of way. So I would appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Straight.
Mr. Schrake.
Mr. President, Ms. Ackerman, council could absolutely turn this ordinance down, and then it would stay the way it has been. That would not change whether you cut your right-of-way or not, because it's always been in the language that if it is under your control, if it is your property, then you maintain it. However, so it could just stay the same, and we'll leave it at 10 inches, and everything is still enforced as it was written. However, up until now, the city, as a courtesy, has cut the right-of-way so that they have a uniform look down certain roads and such. But that's never been codified that the city will maintain the right-of-way. So again, if the majority of council doesn't like the added language for clarity and the change in grass height, you can vote it down and it will still not change the premise of whether you are responsible for cutting your right of way or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
So in essence, we are going to take out
Mr. Mayor.
and we are going to take out the $200 minimum, to clarify. So the only change is pick a height. Everything else is the same. It's been for 20-some years. Just pick a height.
Mr. Horniak.
Can't get much simpler than that.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a few questions on this and a comment to it. And some of these are going to be clarification, which I know the answer to, but I'm going to ask them anyhow. But one of them does have to do with this. So I'm going to kind of layer these one by one, if you would allow me to take them that way. First question I have. So we had discussion a couple of weeks ago in the committee meeting. I think we had a little discussion on it last week. There are certain areas that are just, I'll say, hazardous to ask a homeowner to cut. And we alluded to that a little bit earlier this evening, where there's embankments, there's ditches, there's things of that nature. How do we designate those areas in which the city is going to cut? And how do we not only identify them, but how do we allow those people to know the city will be handling this area? That would be my first question.
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr.
And we've been dealing the same way we've been dealing with it right along. If there were people coming in and say, hey, I can't cut that, we go out and look at it. And we were always very understanding. And in most cases, we cut it. So it was on a request basis. If somebody come in and said, hey, and usually it was because they might have been notified or somebody made a complaint and we go, oh, we understand, we'll take care of that. And Keith can verify that we went with several different things we added to our scheduled cutting that we just normally do, like when we do viaducts, ditches, and what else. So we have a system that works, that seems to work for the people.
Very good. Thank you. Second question that I have is, I guess, just to confirm or make sure that we're saying this out loud. Currently in the property maintenance code, the section written in there is basically that all property owners will maintain their right of ways. Right now it says at 10 inches, it becomes a violation. Correct?
That is not only correct, it was correct before you passed that property maintenance code. So it just reemphasized what we already had since the beginning of times.
Okay. But at no time, Mr. Schrake, to your comments, at no time was it codified or designated that the city of Oregon would provide that cutting service to homeowners or property owners. Is that accurate?
Mr. President,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak, yes, that is accurate. And it still does not codify that the city of Oregon would maintain or cut right of way.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. President, you could make a case that the ditches, being that there are a part of our drainage system that we do cut that's a given.
Okay. And then the third piece I have of this, and then a statement to make after, if I may, Mr. President.
Yes.
So currently at 10 inches, what is before us this evening, whether we delay for 3 readings, whether we act on that this evening, the ordinance is already in place at 10 inches. The proposal removing the change in charge is to change that to 8 inches. That's basically what's before us at
That's
this
the only
stage
different change. That's the
tonight.
only,
But the question that is, the intention is enforcement. Whether it's 10 inches or 8 inches, the intent is that property owners will be cutting their own rights away moving forward, whether this is passed or not passed. Because in fact, it was passed last summer as part of the property maintenance. Is that accurate?
accurate.
Okay.
Mr. President.
Mr. Schrage.
That is accurate, and I would contend that it has been addressed since the beginning of our ordinance, because it has always said all owners and property of which is under their charge. So that would also include the right-of-way, unless the right-of-way is physically owned by the city or physically owned by the state. It is still part of the property owner's property. They just give an easement right-of-way to allow the municipality or government to perform what is for the public good. So that is our roadways, and someone can't stop you from building a roadway because I'm not going to grant you use of my property. That's what easements are. You still own the property. You're probably still paying taxes on that property, but you have to grant the government access to perform a public good.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Strake. So, and again, just to validate, if you want to extend and move this out to a third reading table, whatever it may be, in essence, the ordinance and the legislation is already in place. The question becomes enforcement, which is why you're talking about a March 24th date. So, and part of the discussion was to get ahead of the season so we could notify people and try to let them know this is happening so that they could be prepared for what that is, or raise question about, geez, I don't think I can cut this because I was talking with a resident this morning and I said, we don't want people leaning at a 45-degree angle trying to cut a ditch. That's just not, it doesn't
That's not
make
gonna
any
happen.
sense for us. We don't want that and put that onus on them. But the point I would make to this is going back to what Mr. Cervantes added at the beginning of the meeting this evening. Doing this or not doing this could free up resources that allows us to do other things. There's not a concern that there's a layoff or that hours are reduced or anything of that nature. The benefit of this to all the residents of the community are this may make additional service hours available to Mr. Cervantes' comments before, who's been in here before, which gave me the education of what dipping is in our ditches, because I didn't know what it was at the time until he'd asked that question. Basically, it's clearing out the bottom of the ditches. They go in with a trencher, dig that out so it's all dirt, so the water flows cleanly down that, as you heard them, when they cut that and they get the stubble and the leftover and the debris clogs up the water flow. Those hours could be done for things like that. So when you ask what is the public benefit of being able to utilize this, it's we can reallocate those resources and hours to something else is really what the opportunity is. And with that, I'll give up the floor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Mrs. Pauloff.
Thank you, Mr. President. The phone calls that I have received in the last couple of days are all about what's fair and what's not fair. And what is fair is the way that this ordinance is written, because everyone that owns property in the city of Oregon has an easement or a right-of-way. Am I correct, Mr. Roman? So with that being said, is it fair for one to have the city cut their easement and then people in subdivisions have to cut that little piece of grass between the sidewalk and the street? Everyone has easements, and this ordinance puts everybody equally. That's what I like about the way this ordinance is written. It's okay if we have ditches. We have the equipment to clean those ditches and mow those, and that's what it's for. I completely understand that. But every right of way is the responsibility of the landowner, period. So, that's my take on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pauloff.
Mr. President, then do we have
Ms. Akron?
clarification about the poles and anything that where we hired those kids to go trim around all of the utility poles and hydrants and everything? Will that responsibility then fall to the property owner? I mean, I just want to know so we tell people what the expectations are.
Mrs. Ackerman, I would probably say yes, that it would fall on the property owner. Everybody that lives in a subdivision cuts theirs. I mean, I have 2 telephone poles in front of mine. I have a fire hydrant that I help the neighbor with. We all cut, the property owners do cut that. And
Mr.
I would
President?
assume, we have hired, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Henninger, we hire people, seasonal workers to go around and cut that, correct? So we're hiring people with taxpayer dollars to cut what should be done by the property owner.
So they'll be laid off.
Who will be? laid
Mr.
off?
President,
Mr.
Mr.
President.
Mr. President,
No,
if I may.
Mr. Major.
I just want to make a point of clarification. Nobody's getting laid off and no positions are being eliminated through attrition. As Mr. Horniak pointed out, the workers would be then utilized in other places where there's work that's needed.
Okay, I
So-
just want to be sure so people understand they don't get a ticket.
There
for
will be no
tall grass
layoffs.
around a phone
Mr.
pole.
President. Mr. President,
Mr. Roman?
I think I noted this at the Drainage Committee meeting, and I'm just going to note it again. You know, the city street department in particular operates on income tax, general fund, as well as sewer revenue. But there's a lot of sewers that aren't getting cleaned, and it's a whole nother revenue source. If they're not cutting the areas that can easily be cut, and I'm not saying ditches or any embankments, but if residents can cut straightaways that are easy to cut, that opens it up so other work can be done with other revenues. It does help the general fund by making this change.
Can I
All I'm saying.
ask, Mr. President, can I ask Mr. Roman,
Mm.
what about all of the income taxes that all of the farm ground is providing for the city of Oregon?
Well, that's a good point, Mrs. Ackerman. I mean, everyone's paying income tax. You make a good point. I pay income tax and I cut my right of way. If someone else is also paying income tax, but they don't cut the right of way and my income tax has to pay for it, that doesn't seem correct. Doesn't seem fair.
I'm paying for leaves to get picked up that I don't.
And so am
get-
I.
I don't get that.
So you
I
can
don't get
keep
that
going.
service.
So, and it's not to be, I'm not saying that, I'm just trying to give the viewpoint of just on my own street. If I cut my side of the right of way because I want it to look attractive, I just do it. If I find out the person across the street's not cutting it because the city will do it for them, does that seem right?
Mr. President, we aren't even talking about that. That's already in there. We're talking simply the height.
Mayor, I know that, but I think.
All right, well, let's
we-
not
we-
confuse it. We're talking the height.
It's also about enforcing it.
Well, that has nothing to do with this ordinance. Okay.
It can already be.
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
I just want to say a few things, and I apologize for people that want to leave. But I just wanted to go over a few things, and I've thought about these, and I know we mow along 280 when you get off 280 to go on to Navarre. We mow that even though I believe that's state property. So I don't know if the state's reimbursing us. Then the other thing is the people that live on Navarre Avenue between 280 and Wheeling, Unfortunately, they lost 99% of their front yard. And I'm happy that the city does look after them, but they're getting plowed all the time when it snows. So who's assessing that? The people driving that Kubota up and down Route 2 from Coy Road all the way to the sidewalk ends, they're getting theirs plowed. I live right off Star Avenue. There's kids walking that day in and day out. They don't get no service of a Kubota plowing it. Also, we've talked about the enforcement. I don't know how many times, and I'm going to beat a dead horse again, how many times the in and out mark has to be brought up, and it's always a court thing, or it's going to happen in a week or two or a year or 3 months. Same way with the new downtown. I remember when they were getting ready for the groundbreaking. The herd helmets are out, the brand new gold, silver, platinum shovels, grab a shovel, act like you're moving dirt. And I couldn't tell you how many people, and it's not the workers' fault, but how many people were up there prepping that land for I don't know how long. I used to drive by there, and I mean, it was just crazy. And same way with Pullman Park. I don't know if anybody knows where Pullman Park is. Talk to the people that live behind there. I mean, they call it a park. A lot of people don't believe it's a park. Mainly the city, but it's called the park. I believe it is a park. And you don't know how many times a year I got a call, Keith, to have it mowed. And it's like, I've even went over there to weed whip around the trees because nobody weed whipped it. So it's just one of them things that, and I know before we had this meeting, Terry, I talked to you about it. You can nitpick however you want to spend money any way you want. We know that during budget hearings, whatever, you can dissect anything you want to the way you want it to look. And to me, it's just frustrating that something that's been going on this long, and I've never heard any complaints about it. And the enforcement, I know I talked to Joel today after my interview with the news, and I just told him, I said, the biggest thing is this has been going on for years. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to enforce it. And, like Joel said, nobody's going to lose their job, but, you could put people wherever you want to go. It's just, it's like a dog chasing its tail. I mean, it's just crazy how I guess it's having the politics. What is it? Because I remember our old city administrator, when they implemented a system through the county. I'm not going to get wound up about that. Well, we have the right politics in motion so we can get it passed. So, that's kind of the way I look at it now. Could be wrong, not always right, probably never am right, but just my opinion that it makes no sense. I even brought up the last meeting about the sidewalks being a sheet of ice between I could name probably any road, but the bakery and Circle K say, I mean, there's a sheet of ice. Mr. Strake, darn well, Joel even admitted it today. Do you really think building and zoning, they want to go out there day after day and enforce this? And, I've had a couple people call me and say, all right, I don't care what the height is, but I do know this. I don't have a flail mower where I can mow it 8 inches, 7.5, whatever. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to mow it 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to take Roundup or Reabor, which is illegal, and go spray it out there. So guess what? You're going to have a giant mud patch. How's that going to look? Like I said, I just think it's beyond crazy to pick an issue like this and just drive it in the ground where I've never, ever heard anybody complain about it. And yeah, some people think we're mowing their front yards and backyards, and
we all know that's not true. But to me, it's just irritating and it just makes no sense to me.
Thank you, Mr. Drake.
Mr. President,
Mr. Mayor.
I digested all that and I guess you're undecided at the inches.
I don't care what it is.
All right.
I'll go out
That's
there
all
and
we're
spray it
talking
if they
about.
want me to.
That's all we're really talking about.
Like I said, when's it gonna be enforced? You don't do the sidewalks.
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
in regards to enforcement, we have enforced it based on complaints.
Why is
When-
that?
Because our inspectors, we don't have enough inspectors to just drive around looking for stuff. And I'm not sure if the residents of Oregon want us driving around looking for violations when nobody else seems to be complaining about it. But if somebody does file a complaint with us, we follow through, we do an investigation, and then if it is in violation of our zoning codes, then we issue them a notice of violation. And then usually I would say 94% of the time, they comply and take care of the nuisance because somebody complained and they kind of realized it and it's taken care of. It's for the 6% that we can't get compliance because they're either an out of town landlord or a slumlord, or somebody passed away recently or whatnot. And so it's still in probate or nobody's taking responsibility for the property. Those are the cases where we have to then take the enforcement to the next step. And usually in grass cutting, that enforcement is after 5 days because grass keeps growing. We send streets out, they cut it, and they assess the property. But we have always been and intend to continue to be complaint-driven for enforcement. Otherwise, it's going to be a very, very difficult year. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
I understand what you're saying. And just for the record, I work for the city most of my life. And I remember there was a mobile home or whatever the heck it is with wheels on it falling apart at the corner of Otter Creek in York. And I drove by it and citizens would bring it up. And I don't even live by there, so I don't go by there much. So I remember I made the complaint about it and I'm thinking, am I the only one? Because I live in this city. I've been here my whole life. So is my family. But why should I have to be the one when somebody drives, like a policeman? If Chief Began drives by Circle K and he sees somebody holding a gun to somebody's body, he's not going to wait for the 911 call to come through. He's going to take action and take care of it. And nothing against the building and zoning guys, because I know that's one job I would not want. But if I can see it, they got to be able to see it.
Mr. President.
Mr. Drake.
Mr. Drake. It's not about them looking the other way. If it is obvious, they will address it. But again, we're not going and looking for it. They're typically doing their primary job, and their primary job is going to do building inspections. They're going from one inspection to another inspection to another inspection. If on their route, they happen to pass by something that is considered unsightly or something of that nature, yes, they will actually enter in a complaint. We will also take complaints from council members, which we have. We will take complaints from police and fire, which we have. And then, once it has been entered into the system, we follow through with an investigation and go through the whole process. So nothing is just swept under the rug or looked the other way. We have always followed through with each of our complaints that have been given to us.
Mr. President.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I wanted to bring up too that I read the annual report from building inspection, and the number of complaints is up by about 100 this year, which is about 20% more than what they normally get. Also, the building inspection work itself is up. And if history, correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of others will know the history of this, but building inspection is actually down an employee. And that was a cost savings measure years ago. That position was never filled. I'm not to say that, we're making excuses over here, but I'm telling you, these guys work. And building inspection does a lot of work, and there's a lot more work coming too with the amount of construction that's happening. So I just want to point out and defend building inspection a little bit. They do their jobs, and they do it well, and there's a lot of it. So I just want to point that out. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I got one more thing and I'm done.
Mr. Drake.
The other part is, I just don't understand why a neighbor has to complain about something, even though it's supposed to be confidential. But it seems like anytime a neighbor complains about a neighbor, guess what? There's always going to be a feud, and you know as well as I do, you can't make two adults get along if they don't want to get along. So I just think it creates more of a problem than to just drive by it. And I'm not saying they do it, but if I can see it, they're here, 8 hours a day? You can see a lot of stuff in 8 hours a day, going from job to job. I mean, we dealt with that place over there on, what is it, Precious or Patchen? It went on and on and on and on, and it was like, when's this gonna end?
Thank you, Mr. Drake.
Mr. President.
Mr. Mayor.
Finalize this so that we can get to the three readings. And all somebody has to do is request it. If there's no objection, that means everybody's in favor of it. I'm sure that'll pass. But any complaints, anything, we have more complaints of people calling that people don't cut their grass than the people that call and complain because they're getting forced to cut their grass. So we have to have something there because people do complain. You guys don't hear it. We hear it constantly. And we do have neighborhood feuds that happen. And we do our best to work with the people. And some of them we actually do settle. So we're in enforcement, something we have to do. But we're pretty fair about it. So we'll do when this comes in, there'll be some people that will be irritated, but we'll do our best to be fair at how we take care of this for the enforcement. That's it. All you guys got to do is by the 24th of March, come up with a number.
Council, any further questions? Mrs. Ackerman.
How do we proceed with the requesting up to the charter? If any
The three
members,
readings?
yeah, if council so requests, the reading of any ordinance, whether by title or full text, shall be required to occur on 3 different days. So how do we make that? Just make the motion?
Ms.
Ms.
Pecora.
Ackerman, you just need to make the request.
Oh, okay. Mr. President, I make a request to, have a reading for the, per our charter for, the 3 different day.
Excuse me, Mrs. Ackerman, if you would, please.
I'm sorry.
And it's trying to get clarification.
It's 2 other people, just say they requested also.
Mr. President, I'm sorry.
Well, first, Mrs. Ackerman, that's what your request is, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Salander.
I also request, please, the same.
Thank you, Mr. Salander.
I do too.
Thank you, Mr. Drake.
Now you can have, Cassie read it, listen to this the first week.
Ms. Rawson, would you please read the item so we can have our first reading?
Amending Part 9 of the Streets, Utilities, and Public Service Code, Title I, Section of Chapter 915 of the Oregon Municipal Code titled Weeds, Grasses, and Other Vegetation, Sections 915.01, 915.02, 915.03, and 915.04, and amending Part 13 of the Building Code, Title 3, Section of Chapter 1335.03 of the Oregon Municipal Code titled Amendments.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Now, Mr. Mayor,
I'll just say declare it an ordinance and we'll assume that we did take out that minimum charge.
everything, we don't have to amend anything.
It was out before you put it on. We've taken that out.
Okay.
So all you have to do is declare it an ordinance.
Okay. Council, any further questions? Hearing none, I will assign item 52 of 2025 as ordinance 52 of 2025 and ask, you've already read it into the record. So thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council, I need a motion and a second.
I make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Second,
Second.
was that Ms. Ackerman? Second by Ms. Ackerman. Thank you, Mr. Drake, for the motion. Second by Ms. Ackerman. Council, any objections?
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I have a question. Don't know that it's a point of order, but if we've got 3 requests, does it require a motion, second, and vote?
No.
So we don't need a motion and second on the ordinance. This evening, the 3 requests for the 3 readings suffices. So by reading it into the record, tonight is the first reading, but we don't have to take action on the actual ordinance or any vote whether we support the 3 readings request.
So we don't need the motion. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. President.
No,
Mr. President,
absolutely. Mr.
just for clarification, at the next reading, I would, as Melissa has said, we would ask for amendment to actually formally take out the minimum
The
charge.
minimum charge.
All right? So, to clarify that, just to make everybody aware that that is out.
Thank you.
All right?
Okay. Having considered all the items on the agenda this evening, we will now move to the mayor's report. Mayor?
You know, I had a few things I was gonna say, but after all this, I'm gonna have no report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Major?
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Major. Ms. Porpora?
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Porpora. Mr. Roman?
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Horniak?
I have to break the streak. I'm sorry. I do have a report from my standing committee just to update the council. I was at the Economic Development Foundation meeting on Friday, which was held at Bay Park. Basically presented through their, I would call it, annual meeting. They did answer some questions or have some statements about, comments about the transparency and accuracy of their bookkeeping, which everything did line up. However, what I really did want to announce or talk about tonight is the foundation has hired a new director. Her name is Rebecca Bennett. I think we will all find her as a very welcome addition and a very engaging and energetic individual into that director's role. I believe her first date of employee is February 27th. Is it 24th? Today. Thank you. So she will be available, I know, as part of her onboarding, if you will, first 30, 60 days. She's not only going to be going out and meeting with area business leaders and some of our members of the foundation, but I've encouraged her to reach out to other members of council to make sure that she just introduces herself, let herself be known, and that our intent is probably sometime in the second quarter, maybe to the latter part, she will come here to do a presentation with us at some point once she has landed in the position. So we're gonna let her settle in, but pretty exciting news. They have a director in place, and having met her, I think she's gonna do a fantastic job. And that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Mrs. Paula.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing from my standing committee, but I really want to thank Mr. Shrake, and I want to thank Mr. Henninger. Every time, every time I call you with a complaint, it gets answered. Thank you for cleaning up our ordinances, because really, Mr. Shrake, that's what you're doing. You're making it readable, you're making it more understandable, and I really appreciate all the hard work that you've been doing on this. And thank you for taking all the phone calls that I've given you. I'm glad you pick up when you see my name. And the same with Mr. Henninger. He never not answers my calls. So I appreciate all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Paula. Ms. Ackerman.
Mr. President, I want to say that I feel very badly that we weren't able to vote on the Oregon Jerusalem Historical Society because we're members. I understand that, but I feel bad for Michelle and everything that Michelle Coulter's doing over there. And it's, I feel bad. That was something I was hoping to see get done. So I'm not sure where we go from there.
Mr. President,
Mr. Major.
I'm sorry to interrupt,
That's okay.
if I may.
Mr.
We are still going to meet with the land bank. We're going to make sure that all the documentation is in order, and then the demolition contractor is awaiting for the approval of, they can start technically without this agreement, but they're at risk
Oh,
too.
gotcha.
So, but that's part of the, discussion that we have to have with the contractor too. But first things first, we're going to meet with the land bank, make sure all of the documentation is in proper order in order for us to receive reimbursement from them once the work is done. So just want to
Thank you.
clarify that.
I do
Mr.
want- Oh, I
Mr.
wasn't done yet. I'm sorry.
As
Go
I
ahead.
have a question onto your
Oh, yeah,
comment,
go ahead.
if I may.
Yes.
Mr. President.
Horniak.
My question is this: if 3 people have to recuse themselves, this is presented as an emergency measure. Do 4 votes pass that?
No.
You still have to have 5. So how do we pass this?
No.
Well, she's a
Excuse
past
me.
member of the board, I
Mr.
think is why she
Mr. President?
recused.
She's an officer.
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
I was under the impression, I'm sure Melissa has more insight to this, Ms. Papura, but I was under the impression that as long as you're not serving on a board, on the board, that was the issue. And the reason that is the reason I recused myself. I was actually on the board. I wasn't just a member. I was a voting member of them. So that is why I recused myself.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Okay, can I get back to
Ms.
my
Ackerman?
my report? I mean, considering, yeah, it's just like we're all just basic members now, so I don't know what's the matter then. I did want to point out, though, that per the charter, I wasn't asked, and I guess I should have said, it does say, if any 3 members of council so request the reading of any ordinance, whether by title or full text, shall be required to occur on 3 different days. We just basically gave a very rough synopsis of, the title of what this proposed ordinance is. So it's gonna, I think moving forward, I would appreciate the full text, not necessarily by Cassie. I mean, I volunteer too, just so it gets done. I don't care. I'm not trying to put that on her, but also in section 9B, publishing the same in any English language newspaper printed in Lucas County and of general circulation in the city of Oregon is determined by council. So as many of us have seen in the back of the press, or I'm not sure where you put it in the Blade or how you report it to the Blade, but just so we know that we've done everything we can to get the word out, that it does get published for the duration of this, the time that it takes to pass this, or, take this to the full 3 readings. Can I request that, please? Okay, per the charter?
You're asking to, Mr. President, Ms. Ackerman, you're asking to publish it in the?
Yes,
We can publish it.
thank you, sir.
Yep.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Ackerman. Mr. Sandlander.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing from my standing committee. I just wanted to kind of piggyback off Mr. Horniak's about Rebecca Bennett with the chamber. I did get a chance to meet her at the Jake and Cooper's fundraiser, the dog park fundraiser. So we did get to chat a little bit, and And I agree. Honestly, I told her too that, I'm excited about working with her. She's very involved. She's very involved with the chamber and the businesses and everything, and high energy is putting it lightly. So, so I too am excited. So, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandler. Mr. Drake?
No report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. I have nothing from my standing committee, but I would like to set a public hearing for, 3 public hearings for Monday, March 10th, 2025 at 7 PM for 3 agricultural district renewal applications. The first agricultural district renewal application is for Richard L. and Alice L. Schroeshine, trustees for 95.751 acres located at 0 Navarre Avenue. The second agricultural district renewal application is for Gerald A. Peach for 16 acres located at 300 South Norton Road and 96.731 acres located at 6113 Navarre Avenue. And the final agricultural district renewal application is for Tolereg LLC for 2.4 acres located at 4664 Pickle Road R and 10 acres located at 4655 Brown Road. With that being said, if there is no further business before council, I seek a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
I move
Horniak.
for adjournment.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Second by Ms. Pauloff. This meeting is adjourned.
What is